Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya'i wa sayyidil mursaleen, nabiyina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi al-ghurril mayamin, wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Firstly, I'd like to say Jazakumullahu khairan to the University of Manchester's ISOC for this invitation to speak here in front of all of you guys. It's a privilege and an honor for me, alhamdulillah. And I'm really excited actually to discuss this topic. It's a topic that I'm very passionate about. It's a topic that alhamdulillah I specialized in with my master's. This was the topic of my master's thesis, and it's something that I'm very excited to share with you guys. Ibn Taymiyyah and the Mongols. So we will get into this without further delay, inshallah ta'ala. Many people have heard of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah before. They've heard of him. They've read his works. Perhaps many of us have even studied his works. You have the very popular Al-Aqidatul Wasitiyya. He's written various works in the field of Aqidah, and also other than that as well, Al-Muqaddimah fi Usul al-Tafsir, various works that Shaykh al-Islam wrote, and that is why he's referred to by that title. This lecture will be focusing on Ibn Taymiyyah's role against the Mongols. Many people, they know about Ibn Taymiyyah's scholarly image, what he done as a scholar, some of the works that he wrote as a scholar, but they aren't as familiar with Ibn Taymiyyah's involvement with the Mongols. In fact, many people don't even know that he lived at the same time as them. So we're going to discuss this topic in an orderly fashion, inshallah. I'm going to begin, and we must begin, by giving a brief introduction on the Mongols. Who were the Mongols? The Mongols were a collection, or at least I would say the Mongol Empire was a collection of nomadic tribes ranging from Mongolia. And of course the empire, as we know, famously was founded by Genghis Khan, also known as Genghis Khan. And within the lifetime of Genghis Khan and his rule of the Mongol Empire within the 13th century, so the 1200s, we saw the Mongols show that they were expansionists. They were focused on expansion. We want to conquer the world. We want to go as far as we can. And they done this very quickly. In fact, the Mongol Empire, you'll be interested to know that the Mongol Empire was the largest empire in history. When we say largest empire in history, what do we mean? We mean in terms of the one single empire that had the most power over land that was connected. Land that was connected, the Mongol Empire was the largest. So they had the most land that was connected. So Genghis Khan, he actually had interactions with Muslims. I mean, during his lifetime, there were some traders who had an agreement with Genghis Khan, and they found themselves in Khwarizm. And what ended up happening is they were killed, and their things were stolen. These were traders, okay? So Genghis Khan waged war on the Khwarizm Empire, okay, who the leader of was at the time Muhammad Khwarizm Shah, very famously known. This was a very famous event. So Genghis Khan launched an army, a Mongol army went, and we know the history, okay? This is a little bit of context. Genghis Khan passed away in the year 1227. He died 1227. After he died, his son came into power. His son's name was Ogedai Khan. Ogedai Khan. This was the son of Genghis Khan. Under the rule of Ogedai Khan, the Mongols continued their expansion, and they continued as a unified body. The Mongol Empire was still unified to some extent during the period of Ogedai Khan. Ogedai Khan, his rule saw the Mongols reach Poland and Hungary. Can you believe it? So the Mongols reached Poland. They actually reached Europe during his reign. Okay. When he died, there was an issue. So when he died, I'll explain it in this fashion. The Mongol Empire fragmented. It actually broke up into pieces. It remained, it was still strong, they were still very powerful force, but it fragmented. What does that mean? It means that the Mongol Empire essentially turned into different groups. So you had different empires, different independent powers, all functioning independently or semi-independently. So they had their own independence. From amongst them, we had the Ilkhanids, who we are going to be discussing today in today's talk. From amongst them, you had the Yuan dynasty, okay? From amongst them, you had the Golden Horde, who were based in Russia. And each of these had their own army, their own leader, etc. Okay? So the Ilkhanid Mongols, the Ilkhanid Tatars, as they're referred to, they were founded by Hulaku Khan. Hulaku Khan was the grandson of Genghis Khan. Genghis Khan had many children. So how do we figure out who's going to, some of the brothers are nodding their heads, brother, please, you're not going to reach that level, okay? But anyway, going back to the topic, Genghis Khan, how do we establish now who succeeds Genghis Khan? How do we establish this? He had his main wife, should we say. He had his main wife, okay? Her name was Borte, okay? He had 4 children from her. The youngest was Toloi Khan. He was the father of Hulaku. So Hulaku in 1258 sacked Baghdad, and subhanallah, words cannot express what happened in Baghdad. The amount of people that were killed, hundreds and thousands of Muslims killed. The Abbasids were ruling at the time in Baghdad. So Hulaku was responsible, single-handedly responsible for the fall of the Abbasids. When he took Baghdad, he massacred, pillaged. It was a very terrible sight. Very terrible sight. And various historians discuss this. I mean, if any of you have heard of the great muhaddith, he's got a book called Usdul Ghaba fi Ma'rifati al-Sahaba, very popular book where he collects around 7,000 brief biographies of the companions. An amazing book you can buy, an encyclopedia of a book. Ibn al-Athir actually wrote about, for example, the effect that the Mongols had during the period of Muhammad Khwarizm Shah, and what happened, and how blood was flowing the streets, etc. So the Mongols were not a force to be messed with. Hulaku, 1258, he conquers Baghdad. Okay, what ends up happening is, he now, as I said, the Mongols were expansionists. So Hulaku wants to take the Mongol Empire further. What does he do? He turns his attention towards the Mamluks, Bilad al-Sham. Okay? Bilad al-Sham was ruled by the Mamluks. I know I'm giving you a lot of context. I told the brothers I want to finish by Maghrib, so I'm trying to cram a lot of stuff in here, inshallah. So we're going to get it done. And hopefully this is going to keep you guys engaged, inshallah. So what happens is, 1258, the Baghdad falls. Okay? Then what happens is now, 1260, we have the Battle of Ain Jalut. In the year 1260, 2 years later, we have the Battle of Ain Jalut. This is a battle between the Mamluks. The Mamluks, let's give some context for the Mamluks. The Mamluks came into power in the year 1250. In the year 1250, they toppled the Ayyubid dynasty, who was founded by Salahuddin al-Ayyubi. In the year 1250, who comes to power in that region? The Mamluks come to power. 1260, Sultan Qutuz, Saifuddin Qutuz is in power. He has a rival. His rival's name is Baybars. Baybars is his rival. Baybars is his rival. Now he goes to Baybars. Essentially what happens is Hulaku sends some envoys to the court of Qutuz. And they basically, not so many words, say to him, surrender or die, essentially. We're going to come in full force. Surrender or you're going to face the full force of the Mongols. Qutuz goes, he takes advice from those who are responsible for advising him, and he makes the decision, we're going to kill these envoys. We're going to kill the envoys. We're not surrendering to you. We're going to fight you. He goes to Baybars, who is his rival, and he says, I want you to lead the military campaign. And if you do this, then I will give you part of Aleppo, part of the rule of Syria. You will have that for yourself. Baybars agrees. What happens here? What did we say? Who died? Oghaday Khan, he dies. Oghaday Khan, he dies then. What happens is, when Oghaday Khan dies, Hulaku returns to Karakoram, where the great council is held that decides who will be the next Khan, the great Khan. Who will be the next great Khan? So Hulaku returns to Karakoram. When Hulaku returns to Karakoram, he takes the majority of his army with him. Baybars and Qutuz see this as an opportunity. And they defeat the Mongols at Ain Jalut. They defeat the Mongols at Ain Jalut. Now I will say this. If, Qadar Allah, if Hulaku did not return to Karakoram with the majority of his army, or a large portion of his army, then perhaps it was very likely that Ain Jalut would have ended very differently. And if it ended very differently, the Mongols would have most likely taken Jerusalem, they would have gone towards Medina, Mecca, and they would have had another path towards Europe. So Ain Jalut was a pivotal battle, and that was in 1260. 3 years later, Shaykh al-Islam, Taqiyuddin Ahmad ibn Abdul Halim ibn Taymiyyah is born. Which brings us to our context now, Ibn Taymiyyah and the Mongols. 3 years later, Ibn Taymiyyah is born. Ibn Taymiyyah is called, his name is Ahmad ibn Abdul Halim. One of his titles, during this period, many of the scholars, they were given another name. So for example, Imam al-Nawawi was Muhyiddin, Shamsuddin al-Dhahabi. Okay, for example. So many of the scholars had these titles. Taqiyuddin was Ibn Taymiyyah's title. His actual name was Ahmad ibn Abdul Halim and Ibn Taymiyyah. As to why he's called Ibn Taymiyyah, there are different opinions. You can go back into that and research that in your own time. We're not going to go too detailed into that. He was born in the year 1263 and he is called Al-Harrani because he was from a place called Harran. Okay? Ibn Taymiyyah had early interactions with the Mongols. So what were some of Ibn Taymiyyah's earlier interactions with the Mongols? Hulaku had a son called Abaqa Khan. Abaqa sacked Harran when Ibn Taymiyyah was 6 years old. 6 years old. And because of the sacking of Harran, Ibn Taymiyyah, alongside his father and his family members, they fled Harran and they went to Damascus. And Ibn Taymiyyah was raised in Damascus. Ibn Taymiyyah's father was teaching at the Hanbali Madrasa in Damascus. And Ibn Taymiyyah grew up in Damascus, studied in Damascus. He became a scholar at a very young age. Very young age, in his teenage years, he was a very, very knowledgeable scholar. He started to teach at the same madrasa that his father taught at. And Ibn Taymiyyah had these early interactions with the Mongols. So his early interaction was in the rule of Abaqa, okay, where he sacked Harran. Ibn Taymiyyah's main interactions that we're going to be discussing today were with the Ilkhanid leader Gazan Khan, who came into power in the year 1295. 1295, Gazan Khan comes to power. Hulaku was not a Muslim. Maybe I should mention, Hulaku's sacking of Baghdad caused issues between him and another Mongol, influential, very, very powerful Mongol named Borke Khan, who was actually a Muslim. He was a Sunni Muslim. And he actually sided with the Mamluks against Hulaku. So this is some context. So there was like Islam within the Mongols earlier than Gazan Khan. Okay? But Gazan Khan, he became a Muslim. He became a Muslim, the Mongol leader, Ilkhanid Mongol leader. The Ilkhanids were active and they were ruling the area of Iran. Okay, they were in Iran. Now, what happens is Gazan Khan, like his predecessors, Mongol predecessors, wants to expand. So he faces his direction, he faces towards and focuses on Bilad al-Sham once again. So he launches an attack with the purpose of taking over Mamluk territory, essentially. The Mamluks are still in power. Who was in power during the raids of Gazan Khan? His name was Sultan al-Nasir ibn Qalawun. This was the Sultan that was in power, the Mamluk Sultan who was in power. And the Mamluks, their main central place of power, where they were based, was Cairo. That's where they were based. But they ruled Bilad al-Sham as well. So they had governors, etc., okay, in Bilad al-Sham. Bilad al-Sham, for those of you who don't know, is the area of, when we say Bilad al-Sham today, we refer to Syria, Palestine, etc. Okay? So, Wadi al-Khaznadar is the name of the battle, the first battle that took place, the first conquest that Ghazan launched on the Mamluks. Wadi al-Khaznadar. And this was between the year 1299 and 1300. Ibn Taymiyyah did not take part in this battle. When you read Ibn Taymiyyah's works like Al-Risala al-Qubrusiyya and some of his other works, you see Ibn Taymiyyah talking about this. And if you read some of the works of his students, like the famous book Al-Uqud al-Durriya, written by Ibn Abdul Hadi, Ibn Taymiyyah's student, and it's pretty much the best seerah of Ibn Taymiyyah that exists. It's studied, Al-Uqud al-Durriya, it's called, Ibn Abdul Hadi. We find that no, Ibn Taymiyyah had a bit of a different perception on this battle. Essentially, we'll go into it, but the Mamluk army, it didn't exceed 1/3 of the Tatar army. So the Mongol army exceeded that of the Mamluks. So according to Ibn Fadlillah al-Umari, who was one of the people who has written tarikh on these events, histories on these events, over 10,000 Tatars were killed in this battle. However, and this, what I'm about to mention to you, is a theme that characterized the Mamluk interactions with the Mongols of this period, under the rule of Ghazan Khan. What was the issue? Ibn Fadlillah actually mentions in one of his works, if I recall correctly, it was Ibn Fadlillah, he mentions that when Ghazan Khan became a Muslim, around 100,000 of his troops became Muslims with him. So now the Mongols are a power that are attributing themselves to Islam. And the Mamluks are what? They're Muslims. The Mamluks are Muslims. So this created a big dilemma for the Mamluks. The Mamluks, Aghlabul Askar, this is what's mentioned in the Tarikh, the majority of the army at Wadi al-Khaznadar refused to fight. They refused to fight. These people are Muslims. Intasibuna il-Islam. They attribute themselves to Islam. How are we going to fight these people? So Ibn Taymiyyah, he actually says, there were other issues for Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah actually didn't see that qital, that war, as a qital shar'i. He saw other issues that were amongst the Mamluks of sin and other things, etc. So Ibn Taymiyyah didn't take part in this battle, we would assume for that reason. Because actually he says, وَلِهَذَا كَانَ أَهْلُ الْمَعْرِفَةِ وَالْمُكَاشَفَةِ لَمْ يُقَاتِلُوا فِي تِلْكَ الْمَرَّةِ لِعَدَمِ الْقِتَالِ الشَّرْعِ الَّذِي أَمَرَ اللَّهُ بِهِ وَرَسُولُهُ صلى الله عليه وسلم. Ibn Taymiyyah says, for this reason, أَهْلُ الْمَعْرِفَةِ وَالْمُكَاشَفَةِ, those people of knowledge, those people who knew what was going on, they didn't fight فِي تِلْكَ الْمَرَّةِ. They didn't fight during this battle. Why? لِعَدَمِ الْقِتَالِ الشَّرْعِ. They didn't believe that the situation of the Mamluks was right at that time. Okay, and Ibn Taymiyyah had his own theological views, etc., which fueled his activism during this period, actually. Okay, what happens? Wadi al-Khaznadar, the Mamluks, they lose. They lose the battle. Damascus is occupied for a period by the Mongols. So Ghazan Khan occupies Damascus, Dimishq. Then he returns back. But before he returns back, actually, Ibn Taymiyyah goes, and al-Dhahabi mentions this and others. Ibn Taymiyyah decides that we need to go to Ghazan Khan. We need to visit Ghazan Khan. So Ibn Taymiyyah and a group of other scholars, they go to Gazan Khan. They visit him. They go to him. And one thing we're going to see here is the boldness of Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. How courageous this man was. You're going to see it firsthand. So he goes with other scholars seeking safety. Okay? To plead with Gazan Khan. So what I'm about to narrate to you now has come to us through two sources. Ibn Fadlillah al-Umari narrates this and Ibn Kathir. They both narrate what I'm about to say to you from people who were actually present at this meeting. Because there were various scholars that were present. Okay, one of them was the Qadi al-Qudat of Dimashq, one of the greatest scholars in Damascus at the time, Abu al-Abbas ibn Sasra. Okay, Ibn Sasra. He was present during this meeting. What happens? Ghazan, this is one of the things, by the way, I'm summarizing, I'm really cramming. Okay, Al-Dhahabi believes Ibn Taymiyyah met Ghazan Khan twice, multiple things happened, multiple things are said. Ibn Taymiyyah says to Ghazan Khan, you claim to be a Muslim, you have this, you have that, multiple things happen. But to show you Ibn Taymiyyah's character and his activism during this period, I'm just going to mention one thing. Ghazan Khan, he asks Ibn Taymiyyah, make dua. He asks Ibn Taymiyyah, make dua. Make dua. So Ibn Taymiyyah, he raises his hands. He raises his hands and he says, oh Allah, if he is fighting for kalimatullah, for your word to be the highest, and if he is fighting for jihad, fi sabilik, in your path, then essentially give him. Okay. But if he is fighting for mulk and dunya, and by the way, just for some context, Ibn Taymiyyah believed he's not fighting fi sabilillah. Ibn Taymiyyah believed, he knew he's not fighting. He knew that these people he's not sincere. He's fighting for mulk, essentially, right? He says, then do with him as you wish. Do with him. How did one of the narrators perceive this dua? Forget my interpretation. He is making dua against Ghazan. And he mentions Ghazan was saying Ameen. So he says, Abu al-Abbas ibn Sasra, he mentions, وَنَحْنُ نَجْمَعُ ثِيَابَنَا خَوْفًا أَنْ يُقْتَلْ فَيُطَرْتِشْ بِدَمِهِ. We gathered our thobes, our clothes, because we were scared he's going to be killed. Ibn Taymiyyah will be killed and his blood is going to go on our clothes. Then what happens is, ثُمَّ لَمَّا خَرَجْنَا قُلْنَا لَهُ. When we had gone from Ghazan, we said to Ibn Taymiyyah, what did they say? And he himself is narrating this. He says, we said to him, كِتَّ تُهْلِكُنَا مَعَكَ. You were going to kill us with you. You were going to get us destroyed with you. وَنَحْنُ مَا نَصْحَبُكَ مِنْ هُنَا. We're not going to be with you from now. What does Ibn Taymiyyah respond? He says, وَلَا أَنَا أَصْحَبُكُمْ. I'm not going to be with you either. You guys do your thing. I'm not going to be with you. This was the character of Ibn Taymiyyah. On this occasion, actually, they even offered Ibn Taymiyyah food. He refused to eat. He said, how am I going to eat you guys' food when I know where you got this food from? So this was Ibn Taymiyyah's character. And by the way, if you read works on this history, even from the Mongol perspective, because some people, they ask the question, how important actually was Ibn Taymiyyah in these interactions? Ibn Taymiyyah was important. His importance is highlighted by the fact that he's present at such meetings with the leader of the Mongols. And the leader of the Mongols is referring to him like this. So he's being offered food and he's refusing the food. This was the boldness Ibn Taymiyyah had. And actually, this was the type of character we can say Ibn Taymiyyah was in a way a bit criticized for actually. Like al-Dhahabi, it's reported that al-Dhahabi had some criticisms of Ibn Taymiyyah, even though he loved Ibn Taymiyyah. And he said about Ibn Taymiyyah that Allah gave life to Sham, bihi, from him. And he says, Bal Islam, during this period, because of Ibn Taymiyyah's activism. So Ibn Taymiyyah's perspective on the Tatars during the ihtilal of Dimashq when Dimashq was captured during this period, Ibn Taymiyyah got to see the characteristics of the Tatars. How are they? ينتسبون أنفسهم إلى الإسلام, but how are they? They claim to be Muslims. What's their reality though? So he says, جمهورهم لا يصلون. The majority of them, they don't pray. They don't pray. He mentioned things like والصوم, fasting is more common amongst them than salah, etc. And he saw things. There's an incident actually that happened. They would go around and they would see that these Tatar soldiers are drunk. They're drunk, they're drinking alcohol. So Ibn Taymiyyah, this is where he engaged his scholarly self, and he would tell his ashab, and he himself also went by this, that don't stop them from drinking alcohol. This is where masalih and mafasid come into play. Because Ibn Taymiyyah, he said, فَصَهْوُهُمْ شَرٌّ مِنْ سُكْرِهِمْ. Because them being conscious is actually worse than their sukr, than their drunkenness. Because when they're drunk, they are not going to be causing fasad. But when they're in a situation of consciousness, these people are going to cause fasad fil ard. They're going to do all sorts of things. So actually in this situation, this is better for them. So don't stop them. Let them destroy themselves. This was Ibn Taymiyyah's attitude towards the Tatars who had occupied Damascus. So eventually they actually returned. Gazan returned and he said, I'm going to return back. Actually, he returned. And the Tatars in general, they returned. What ended up happening is a Mamluk army came. They sent an army from Egypt, came, and eventually the Tatars returned back. And Damascus was freed from them. Okay? Now there was a period where nothing's happening. Ibn Taymiyyah was active. He writes a letter to Sultan al-Nasir, provoking him, telling him, you need to go and attack these people before they attack you. Before they attack you, you need to go and attack them. And actually, forget advice. He said, this is wajib. This is wajib. You have to go and attack them before they attack you. And he mentions various points in this risala. It's a risala to the Sultan. He brings ayat from the Quran to strengthen his argument. He mentions khawf al-Tatar, that these people are in a situation of khawf. They're scared, and he's describing their fear. Okay? And he actually also indirectly, I would interpret this as indirect. I mean, he's not threatening him, but he's telling him, if you don't do this, this is the iqab for doing tarkul jihad in this manner. This is what you're going to get, etc., etc. And he says it's not from Islam, it's not from the Sharia of Islam for you to wait for your enemy to attack you. It's an obligation to attack them. That was Ibn Taymiyyah's perspective on the matter. What happens? Gazan approaches again. Gazan approaches again. Gazan Khan approaches again in the year 700 Hijri 1301. He intends for Sham. And his intention is, I'm going to take Sham, then I'm going to go for the Mamluk home, Egypt. I'm going to go for Cairo. Okay? Sultan al-Nasir bin Qalawun, he makes ways towards Sham to meet the enemy. He makes way. Okay? News reached Damascus that the Tatars are coming. So the people, they wanted to flee. They wanted to just flee. They wanted to just escape. They wanted to get out of Damascus. Ibn Taymiyyah, what did he do during this period? He stayed in al-Jami' al-Umawi. He stayed there in the masjid, in his position. What was he doing? كان يفسر آيات الجهاد. He was explaining the verses that pertain to jihad. Okay? And preparing the people for what's about to happen with them. Things became very, very serious. The Imam Badruddin ibn Jama'ah started to do qunut in every single salah. The people were very, very scared. Okay? They didn't know what's going to happen to them. What ends up happening is Sultan al-Nasir, he turns around. He goes back to Egypt. So what Ibn Taymiyyah does, he takes it upon himself to strengthen the Shami faction of the Mamluks. So he stays, he's motivating the Amir. What does he then do? He travels fast to Cairo himself. He goes, he makes way to Sultan al-Nasir. What is going on? What's happening here? He goes. As for the reason as to why Sultan al-Nasir returned on this occasion, Al-Yunini mentions that weather was the reason. Al-Dhahabi, he says it was cowardice, actually. They were just being cowards, okay, and they returned. As we know, إذا يمكن الجمع فأولى من الترجيح. So we can do both. We can say both of these reasons were there. Perhaps the weather was a big issue, and maybe there was cowardice amongst the army. So Ibn Taymiyyah, during this period as well, he writes a risala ila umum al-muslimin, la ammat al-muslimin. Okay? He writes a letter to the general masses now. Now he's talking to the general masses. He covers various perspectives in this. The hukam, what is the ruling? And we all know the ruling. Ibn Taymiyyah is telling them, this is the hukam on what you have to be doing now. The fadl, the virtues of what you're going to be doing. Not only that, a perspective from qadr. So he says, even though from the outside this may look like a mihna, it may look like a trial, in reality it's a blessing. This is actually a blessing for all of you. And he mentions and he compares the situation of the Muslims at the time with the situation of the Sahaba, the Ansar, and the Muhajirun. So he's encouraging the Muslims to stay firm. Syrian faction is ready. He goes to Egypt and he encourages them. And he says to them, very, very famous statement that Ibn Kathir mentions, إن كنتم أعرضتم عن الشام وحمايته أقمنا له سلطانا يحوطه ويحميه ويستغله في زمن الأمن. That if you people, if you Umara, you leaders in Egypt, if you don't defend Sham, forget you people. We're going to put people in place who are going to actually defend Sham. Who are actually going to defend Sham. So he's speaking to them like this directly. When they agreed that, okay, yes, they were boosted, okay, what ends up happening? The Tatars turn around. The Tatars, they turn around and they return. Why do they return? Because of very, very bad weather. Okay, we're not in the 21st century here we're talking about back then. It's very difficult, okay, for you to take armies and all of this, etc. Ibn Taymiyyah, what does he mention? He mentions that the same day, or what the historians mention, what's mentioned regarding Ibn Taymiyyah on this period, the same day that Ibn Taymiyyah entered Cairo to motivate the Sultan, that is the same day that the Tatars chose to go back. That's the same day. And he mentions, وَبَيَانًا أَنَّ النِّيَّةَ الْخَالِصَةَ وَالْهِمَّةَ الصَّادِقَةَ, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with an-niyya al-khalisa, sincere intention, and himma, having this desire and aspiration for the ummah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives victory through this. Allah gives victory through this. وَإِن لَمْ يَقَعَ الْفِعْلِ, he actually mentions, وَإِن لَمْ يَقَعَ الْفِعْلِ, even if they don't do anything, even if nothing happens, just these things alone are enough. What happens then? 2 years go by. 2 years go by. Gazan decides to return. He wants to capture Sham. He decides to return. Once again, worry, qalaq, fills the hearts of people in Sham. They're worried, they're scared. What's going to happen with us? And we have to really bear in mind here that a lot of these people, they know the history. They know Hulaku. They know what Hulaku done in Baghdad. You see, we just have to put this into perspective here. They know what these people are capable of. They know. And actually this reminds me of something that I read. Ibn Taymiyyah, how does he describe Wadi al-Khaznadar? Even though he wouldn't have taken part in Wadi al-Khaznadar, the loss at the first battle, the loss when they took over Damascus, etc., the loss, Ibn Taymiyyah describes this, that there was goodness in this. Why? Because Ghazan Khan had said that he is a what? A Muslim, right? So people started to assume good of Ghazan Khan. They started to assume good of him. It's going to be fine. Muslim. Rajul Muslim, muttaqi. His title was, if I recall correctly, Padishah Islam. Like he's the king, he's the ruler of the Muslims. That's how Ghazan Khan framed himself. Ibn Taymiyyah explains that what they done at Wadi al-Khaznadar, what happened at Wadi al-Khaznadar, eventually showed us their reality. So it showed the people their reality, not that no, these people are these people. So the people were scared, okay? And Ibn Taymiyyah, what does he do? What he was doing, he motivates the people. The man was not a coward. One thing that I remember when I was doing my research on this issue, a common thing that shocked me was the courage of this man. Wallahi, if you read not just himself, what others are saying about him, this man, subhanallah, he was not a coward. He was not a coward. What happens is, he was saying to the Umara, you know what he was saying? You are going to be successful this time. You are going to be successful. So what did the Umara say to him? Sometimes we say this to each other as well nowadays. Say insha'Allah. Say insha'Allah. What does Ibn Taymiyyah say? He says, insha'Allahu tahqiqan la ta'liqan. Insha'Allah, it's going to happen. I'm not saying insha'Allah the way we say insha'Allah. I know it's going to happen. And he wasn't saying it based on just his feelings. He actually interpreted certain ayat of the Quran. For example, ذَلِكَ وَمَنْ عَاقَبَ بِمِثْلِ مَا عُوقِبَ بِهِ ثُمَّ بُغِيَ عَلَيْهِ لَيَنْصُرَنَّهُ اللَّهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَعَفُوٌّ غَفُورٌ in Surah Al-Hajj. So Ibn Taymiyyah read these ayat of the Quran and said, nah, we have this. We are going to win this time. So what happens is, the days prior to this battle, which is called Shakham, also known as Marj al-Saffar, the Battle of Marj al-Saffar, the days were very, very difficult. And just how the Shaykh had previously done, وَكَمَا أَنَّ الشَّيْخ أَنْكَرَ أَشَدُّ الْإِنْكَارِ غُرُوبَ الدِّمِشْقِيِّينَ, just as he had said to the people of Damascus, you cannot leave, you cannot do firar, you cannot leave here. It's not allowed for you, you can't do this. He done it this time as well. You can't leave. And what happens? What happens is, Ibn Taymiyyah, after motivating the people, he actually leaves. So the people, as you can imagine, they start assuming of him. They start assuming things. This guy, he's telling us not to leave, and he leaves himself. Little did they know that he left to join the battle. That's why he left. He left to join the battle. And this is the battle which Ibn Taymiyyah physically fought in against the Mongols. He physically fought the Mongols in the Battle of Marj al-Saffar. And we have various narrations telling us about the Sheikh's bravery. One of the narrations, one of the Umara, and this is collected by Ibn Abdul Hadi in his book, Al-Uqud al-Durriya, he mentions, وَيُوَثِّقُ بَعْضُ الْأُمَرَاءِ, that some of the Umara, they add to this argument that how brave Ibn Taymiyyah was في تلك المعركة. فيقول قال لي الشيخ يوم اللقاء. One of the amirs, he says that the Sheikh Taqiyuddin Ahmad ibn Abdul Halim, Ahmad ibn Abdul Halim ibn Taymiyyah, he said to me, يوم اللقاء, the day that we were going to meet the enemy, ونحن بمرج الصفر, we were there, and you can see, he says, يا فلان الدين, he calls the Amir, he says, أوقفني موقف الموت, put me in the position where people die. In battle, the place where people usually die, put me there. I want to be there. Put me in that position. So he leads him to موقف الموت. He says, this is what you want. He says, Ya Sayyidi, هذا موقف الموت. This is موقف الموت. And he mentions, فرفع Ibn Taymiyyah, he raises, فرفع طرفه إلى السماء. He looks up to the sky and he moves his lips for a long time. He's saying things. And then he charges straight forward. And then he says, وَأَنَّ دُعَاءَهُ, that his dua, it was accepted. It was accepted منه في تلك الساعة. That was Ibn Taymiyyah's activism against the Mongols. So Ibn Taymiyyah, he physically fought the Mongols. Ibn Taymiyyah passed 3 anti-Mongol fatwa, which we haven't had a chance to go into. But the purpose of these fatwa was to deal with this shubha. What was the shubha? What was the doubt? Can we fight these people? Can we fight these people? Essentially, Ibn Taymiyyah said, yes, you can fight them and you have to fight them. Why do you have to fight them? لأنهم خرجوا عن شرائع الإسلام. That was his reasoning. What does that mean? Does that mean هم كانوا مرتدين? Is that what that means? It doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. It means that when you have a group of people and they are leading, okay, they have their own, let's say, empire, or they have their own place where they are ruling, and they are failing to establish some of these shara'i, the rules of Islam, the rulings of Islam, the fundamental rulings of Islam. مثلا ما يقيمون الصلاة. They're not establishing prayer. ولا يؤتون الزكاة. They're not paying zakah. Okay? They don't have the adhan going on. They're not doing things. Then يجب قتالهم. You have to fight them. So Ibn Taymiyyah made various arguments in his 3 fatwa, and after Gazan Khan died, his brother came into power. His brother's name was al-Jaytu Khan. Al-Jaytu, one of the fatwa of Ibn Taymiyyah, is dated to his period. Why? Because he mentions that the leader of the Mongols has now become a Shia. He's now become a Shia, and al-Jaytu became a Shia. In the year 1309, al-Jaytu became a Shia. And al-Jaytu was less of, if we can say, a warrior than some of the others, meaning he was people, the way they describe him is he was interested in ladha and enjoying himself, etc. So initially he actually tried to do sulh with the Mamluks. He tried to bring peace between himself and the Mongols. But eventually he launched a campaign against the Mongols in the year 1312. In the year 1312, his campaign, nothing came of it. But Ibn Taymiyyah wrote his longest fatwa. And Ibn Taymiyyah's fatwa, as I said, the purpose was to argue why they should be for and certain details regarding them, etc. If they run away, what do we do, etc. All of these things, Ibn Taymiyyah was serving his community as a scholar. So against the Mongols, Ibn Taymiyyah, his roles consisted of a scholarly role. Not only that, a diplomatic role. He met with Gazan multiple occasions, according to Imam al-Dhahabi. Not only that, Ibn Taymiyyah was a propagandist. He was going out there raising and spreading propaganda amongst the Mamluks to fight these people. And lastly, he was a soldier. Ibn Taymiyyah physically fought against the Mongols, rahimahullah ta'ala, and the Battle of Marj al-Saffar, the result of it was it protected Bilad al-Sham from these people. And Ibn Taymiyyah believed that if these Mongols take over Bilad al-Sham, then essentially Islam is at threat. Why? Because these people, what are they going to establish afterwards? What are they going to establish afterwards? And when they entered and they returned after Marj al-Saffar, what did Ibn Taymiyyah say? The people, obviously, I assume, they would have been celebrating, of course, at this result, and the people were together and they saw the victorious army returning. What did Ibn Taymiyyah say? He says, Ana rajulu millatin. I am a man of Islam. I am a man of al-millah. La rajulu dawla. I'm not a man of the dawla. I'm not a man of the country. My interests here are Islam. That's why I do what I do. That's why I do what I do. So to conclude, from the story of Ibn Taymiyyah and the Mongols, we must all ask ourselves, what roles do we play for Islam? What are we doing for Islam? And of course, from a legal perspective, of course, right? With the law in mind, what can we do? What can we do? Right now, for example, we have seen the bloodshed and the killing, the massacring and the genociding of our brothers and sisters in Palestine. We pray Allah makes things easy for them. We have seen what has been happening. One of the things that Ibn Taymiyyah shows us is that courage is a very, very component of activism. So even today, within the remit of the law, many people, they choose to be silent and not say anything. Here, you're in London, you're in Manchester, you can protest, you can be active, you can do talks, you can raise awareness, you can raise money, you can do things to help the Palestinian brothers and sisters. You can do whatever you can. So essentially, all of us, and on a more general level as well, on a more general level, we're all in university. I mean, you guys are in university now, alhamdulillah. Technically I still am, I'm doing something else. But, we're all in university, we're all thinking about what we're doing here. And this is one of the times in your life where you're going to be thinking about, what do I want to do with my life? Sah? You're going to be thinking about, what do I want to do with my life? So it's incumbent upon you to think, how can you benefit the Muslim community, the Muslim ummah? What utility do you have? Or are you one of those people that the people will say about you, وُجُودِهِ كَعَدَمِهِ, that this person's existence and his non-existence are the same. His mother giving birth to him and his mother not giving birth to him are the same thing. Doesn't make a difference to us. Ibn Taymiyyah was not like that. Ibn Taymiyyah was not like that. Ibn Taymiyyah, how many of you knew how many of you didn't know some of these things that were mentioned in this talk about Ibn Taymiyyah? Raise your hands. So I would say the majority of the people didn't know this. But that shows you something about him. It shows you that he was just an activist. He was an active man. What you know about him is only one side of his character. You only know one angle of the man. You only know half of what he was. If that. You only know al-wasitiyya from him, or al-muqaddimah fi usul al-tafsir, or al-hamawiyya al-kubra, or dar'u ta'arud al-aql wal-naql. That's all you know of Ibn Taymiyyah. You don't know that the man actually cared about his ummah, the people. He saw himself. What type of man strengthens people in Sham, gets on a horse or whatever he's riding beast, rides to Cairo, says to the Sultan, what on earth are you doing? Says to the Umara, you people, you guys, what are you doing? If you don't stand up for Sham, we're going to put people in place of you. What type of man does that? And Ibn Taymiyyah definitely did not think how some Muslims think, who attribute themselves to Ibn Taymiyyah. They attribute themselves to Ibn Taymiyyah. They study Ibn Taymiyyah. Ibn Taymiyyah didn't think like you. Ibn Taymiyyah was not on what you are on. Ibn Taymiyyah did not have the same theological beliefs as you. Inshallah, you will find out when you keep reading. So that's the point. And Ibn Taymiyyah himself acknowledged his utility. Ibn Taymiyyah himself acknowledged when he said in a statement expressing who stood for Islam other than me. Who stood for Islam other than me? When things had diverted, I stood for Islam. I stood for Islam. That's what I done. Barakallahu feekum wa jazakumullahu khairan.